The offer no one expected. The Grand Meridian Hotel shimmered with golden light that spilled across polished floors like liquid warmth, reflecting the glamour of a Friday evening where businessmen, travelers, and dream chasers cross paths without ever knowing the stories behind one another's eyes. It was the kind of place where fortunes were discussed over crystal glasses, where guests arrived with designer luggage and left with deals worth millions finalized over a handshake. But in the heart of all that luxury, behind the soft glow of chandeliers and the quiet hum of classical music, stood someone who didn't belong to that world, at least not in the way people imagined. Layla Hassan wiped the last bit of moisture from the mahogany counter in the restaurant lounge, her hands steady though she had already worked a 10-hour shift. At 29, she carried herself with a calm grace that came from surviving storms far greater than a demanding job or a late-night rush. Her almond brown eyes held a depth that hinted at chapters of her life only she truly understood, chapters filled with sacrifice, determination, and the unshakable belief that dignity was not given but lived, day by day, through kindness, resilience, and self-respect. Layla had arrived in this city 7 years earlier with nothing but a backpack, a certificate from a community college, and a promise to her mother that she would make something of herself. Her mother had passed away the same year, leaving behind memories of a woman who worked 3 jobs, spoke 5 languages, and still found time to read books with her daughter every night. Layla inherited her mother's linguistic talent, and even as a child, she could switch between Arabic, French, and English with an ease that surprised adults. Her mother believed languages were keys that could open doors to understanding, opportunity, and empathy in a world where so many built barriers instead of bridges. And now, working as a waitress in one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city, Layla used those keys. She spoke kindly to tourists in their native tongues. She offered comfort to travelers far from home by greeting them in words that felt familiar. She treated every guest with respect, not because it was required, but because she knew people carried invisible battles, and sometimes a warm word could soften the sharp edges of a difficult day. Yet all the kindness in the world could not prepare her for the moment the restaurant doors opened and a man walked in who would challenge her patience and her pride in a way she had not expected. He arrived with the kind of swagger that announced his presence before he even spoke, the kind of confidence that wasn't earned but worn like an expensive coat. Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Systems, one of the fastest-growing tech conglomerates in the country, stepped inside with a crisp suit, polished shoes, and an expression carved from superiority. At 46, Ethan was known for building empires with ruthless precision. Shareholders described him as brilliant. Employees whispered that he was cold. His success was undeniable, but so was the arrogance that clung to him like a shadow. Tonight, he entered with a group of international investors trailing behind him, men who carried themselves with old wealth and measured expectations. They represented an opportunity Ethan needed. The company had suffered a public setback after a failed product launch, and these investors were the difference between rebuilding his reputation or watching it crumble. He needed everything tonight to go perfectly, flawlessly, and that meant he would not tolerate what he considered incompetence from anyone beneath him. Layla stepped forward with her usual warm smile, not because he was a CEO, not because his suit screamed wealth, but because that was who she was. She approached the table with her notepad in hand, ready to welcome them to the Grand Meridian. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice soft but confident. "Welcome to the Meridian. My name is Layla, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with something to drink?" Ethan looked up, and in that brief moment, his eyes scanned her from head to toe, not with admiration, not with respect, but with the dismissive judgment of someone who had already decided she was insignificant. He didn't smile, he didn't nod, he simply exhaled sharply, as though her presence alone irritated him. "Drinks?" he replied loudly, glancing at his guests as if her question was somehow absurd. "We haven't even discussed the menu yet, and she's rushing us already." The investors exchanged awkward glances. They knew rudeness when they heard it. Layla, however, kept her expression neutral. "My apologies, sir," she replied calmly. "I'm here to assist you however you prefer. I can begin with the menu, the specials, or drinks, whichever you'd like." Her politeness seemed to annoy Ethan even more. He leaned back, crossing his arms, studying her as if she were a puzzle he didn't care to solve. "Tell me something," he said loudly, ensuring nearby tables could hear. "Do you even understand our guests? Do you speak anything besides English?" His tone wasn't curious. It was mocking. He wanted to belittle her. Silence rippled through the room as diners paused, sensing tension. The investors shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair, began to speak, but Ethan raised his hand to stop him. He wasn't finished. Layla took a slow breath, reminding herself of her mother's lessons. Anger meets anger, but dignity diffuses it. "Yes, sir," she answered gently. "I speak several languages. How may I assist you?" Ethan smirked, the expression of a man preparing to humiliate someone for entertainment. "So," she asked, "do you accept, or are you afraid to embarrass yourself?" The investors shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the display. The older gentleman among them, a man with an accent that hinted at a Middle Eastern background, watched Layla with quiet curiosity. Layla took a long breath. She thought about her mother, about the nights she spent teaching Layla classical Arabic poetry, about the days they saved coins in a jar labeled dreams, about the belief her mother had instilled in her that no job, no uniform, no circumstance reduced a person's intrinsic worth. When Layla finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried with unwavering strength. "Sir," she said gently, "I don't accept your offer." Ethan's eyebrow arched with triumph. He thought she was afraid, but Layla continued before he could speak. "I don't accept the money," she clarified, "and I don't accept any terms that involve disrespecting myself or anyone who works in service." A murmur spread through the restaurant. People were listening closely now. Layla placed her notepad at her side, straightening her posture with quiet dignity. "However," she said, her tone firm but warm, "I will serve you in Arabic. Not because I want your money, and not because I need to prove anything to you, but because hospitality is a choice I make with pride, and I won't let arrogance take that away from me." The room fell silent. Even Ethan blinked, momentarily taken aback. Layla continued, her voice steady, as she met his stare without fear. "And when I'm done," she added, "I would like to make you a different offer, a better one, one you may actually need." Ethan leaned back slowly, his smirk fading just enough to reveal uncertainty. The investors watched with growing interest. The older gentleman among them folded his hands, a faint smile touching his lips as though he already understood something Ethan did not. Layla held her ground, poised, calm, and unbroken. For the first time that night, the power in the room shifted, and everyone could feel it.
The language of dignity. The air inside the Grand Meridian shifted the moment Layla finished speaking, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of her words and reflected them back with amplified strength. Conversations that had previously filled the room with a soft hum faded into silence as guests leaned forward, finding themselves unexpectedly drawn into a moment far more meaningful than the usual luxury dining spectacle. Even the faint clinking of glassware stopped, replaced by an almost electric anticipation. What would she say next? How would the powerful CEO respond? And more importantly, how had a waitress turned the entire atmosphere of a prestigious restaurant into a stage where integrity and arrogance collided head-on? Ethan Cole's expression revealed a crack in his confident facade, one he quickly tried to conceal. He cleared his throat, lifted his chin, and narrowed his eyes, attempting to regain the dominance he assumed the moment he walked through the restaurant doors. Yet something about Layla's calm defiance unsettled him. She had refused his million-dollar challenge, not out of fear, not out of doubt, but out of principle. And that was something money had never taught him how to handle. The investors seated around him observed with renewed focus, sensing that the evening had shifted from a simple business dinner into something far more revealing about the man whose leadership they were evaluating. Layla gently clasped her hands in front of her, not in submission, but in centered composure, the kind that came from years of learning to regulate her voice and her emotions under pressure. She felt no need to raise her tone or dramatize the moment. The quiet confidence that flowed from her was more powerful than any argument she could have thrown back at Ethan. She inhaled slowly and spoke in Arabic, clear, elegant, fluid, and precise. مساء الخير سيدي، يشرفني أن أقدم لكم الخدمة الليلة. هل تود أن أبدأ بالطلبات أم تفضل أن أشرح لك قائمة الطعام أولاً؟ Her pronunciation was flawless, each word carrying the melody of a language she had grown up speaking at home, a language her mother had filled with stories, poetry, lullabies, and prayers. Her voice moved with a musical rhythm that drew the attention of the older investor instantly, his eyes softening with recognition and admiration. The investors listened, spellbound. Even diners who didn't understand Arabic felt the grace in Layla's tone. Ethan's smirk evaporated. He had expected hesitation, stumbling, uncertainty, something he could ridicule. Instead, he was confronted with a level of fluency that left him briefly speechless. Layla continued, flowing into the details of the restaurant's specials, explaining flavors, textures, and preparation in Arabic with a level of articulation that felt like art. Every sentence she spoke carried pride in her culture, confidence in her knowledge, and an unmistakable dignity that made Ethan's challenge look increasingly foolish. His posture stiffened as he realized that the spectacle he intended to use for her humiliation was turning into a showcase of her brilliance. When Layla paused, waiting for Ethan's response, a quiet murmur rippled through the restaurant. Some guests exchanged impressed glances, others nodded in silent support. Ethan forced a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. He said sharply, "Fine, that was nice. But I'm sure you memorized something basic. Let's try something more complicated." He leaned forward, placing both elbows on the table as if preparing for a battle of intellect he believed he could still win. He commanded abruptly, "Translate this," without giving her context. "Tell my guests that if they invest in my company, they will be partnering with the most innovative minds in the tech industry, and that together, we can reshape the future of global communication." Layla didn't blink. She didn't fumble. She didn't scramble for words. Without hesitation, she translated perfectly. أخبر ضيوفك أنه إذا استثمروا في شركتك فإنهم سيتعاونون مع أحد أكثر العقول ابتكاراً في مجال التكنولوجيا وأنكم معاً ستعيدون تشكيل مستقبل الاتصال العالمي. Her voice held no trace of hostility, only calm professionalism. The investors exchanged quick glances, visibly impressed. The older gentleman smiled, nodding with appreciation for her accuracy and eloquence. Ethan's jaw tightened. She continued speaking in Arabic, seamlessly adding, وأن أهم استثمار في أي شراكة ناجحة هو الاحترام المتبادل، لأن الابتكار الحقيقي لا يولد في بيئة مليئة بالتعالي، بل في بيئة تقدر فيها قيمة كل فرد مهما كان دوره. Her addition was gentle, not insulting, not confrontational, but undeniably profound. Even those who didn't understand the language could feel the intention behind her tone. The older investor let out a quiet breath of astonishment. Ethan, however, felt the shift in power more intensely now. He sensed he had lost control of the situation, and that loss ignited something sharp and defensive inside him. "What did you say?" Ethan snapped, though he tried to mask the edge in his voice. Layla maintained eye contact, her expression neutral. She translated simply, "I said that mutual respect is essential for any successful partnership, and that innovation thrives in environments where everyone's value is acknowledged." Ethan gritted his teeth. She had not insulted him. She had simply spoken a truth he didn't want to hear, in front of the very people he needed to impress. The older investor finally spoke, his tone warm and sincere. He said, "Her Arabic is impeccable,
Truly, and I must say her addition was not only accurate, but wise. Ethan forced a laugh, attempting to brush off his embarrassment, but it came out hollow. Sure, whatever. Anyone can memorize a poem or a phrase. Layla shook her head gently. She had no need to argue. Instead, she decided to offer something even more meaningful. A story. Sir, she said softly, Arabic isn't something I memorized. It is part of who I am. My mother taught me every letter, every phrase, every expression with love and patience. She believed language is more than words. It is connection. It is understanding. It is respect. Her voice softened, but her words carried emotional weight. When she passed away, I promised myself I would carry her lessons forward because she taught me that dignity doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from how we treat people, especially those who cannot do anything for us. Her words hit the restaurant with the force of truth. Ethan swallowed hard, but tried not to show it. His face displayed a flicker of discomfort, a rare, unfamiliar vulnerability creeping through the cracks of his self-assured mask. The investors, however, looked moved. Some nodded slowly, acknowledging the depth of what she had just expressed. The older gentleman leaned in slightly, examining Ethan with a new kind of scrutiny, as if evaluating not the CEO's business plan, but his character. Layla took a small step back, clasping her hands gently once more. She continued softly, "You challenged me, but the real challenge, perhaps for all of us, is to remember that success means nothing if it comes at the cost of our humanity." Her tone was not accusatory. It was compassionate, almost forgiving, yet powerful enough to echo across the room as if carried by something greater than her voice alone. She did not wait for applause. She did not wait for admiration. She simply finished with grace, saying, "Now, sir, shall I bring your guests their drinks?" The silence was profound, heavy with the weight of introspection. Ethan stared at her, his facade slowly crumbling as he realized that he had not just lost a bet, he had lost face, lost respect, lost control. And yet, for reasons he did not understand, he felt something else rising beneath his frustration, a strange, unwelcome feeling he had avoided for years, remorse. The investors exchanged looks, this time not questioning Layla, not analyzing her, but questioning Ethan. The older gentleman smiled warmly at Layla. He said gently, "Yes, drinks would be wonderful." And in that moment, without raising her voice or lowering her values, Layla had transformed the entire evening. And Ethan Cole, one of the most powerful CEOs in the city, found himself facing a truth he had never considered. He was not the most impressive person at his own table.
The unseen battle within. As Layla walked away toward the bar to prepare the drinks, the Grand Meridian settled into a silence that held more emotion than words ever could. Many guests quietly returned to their meals, but their eyes lingered on the table, where the CEO who had walked in dripping with arrogance now sat in an unexpected stillness. Ethan Cole had never been the kind of man who reflected deeply, who questioned his own behavior, or who examined the cracks in his character with honesty. The world had always rewarded his confidence, his decisiveness, and his refusal to back down. But tonight, for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar pressing at the edges of his chest, a discomfort that wasn't anger, but a quiet awareness that he had crossed a line that dignity shouldn't allow. He glanced at the investors surrounding him. The men he hoped to impress were no longer enthralled by the power he projected. Their eyes were thoughtful, some disapproving, others simply observing him with a new kind of scrutiny. Reputation mattered more than profit margins, and character often weighed heavier than quarterly reports. They had come to expect to evaluate his leadership, but now they were silently evaluating his humanity. Ethan shifted in his chair,
feeling the weight of Layla's words replaying in his mind. Respect, dignity, the environment where innovation thrives. A part of him wanted to reject the discomfort, bury it beneath excuses, dismiss it as sentimental nonsense. But something about the way she had spoken, calm, steady, compassionate, left no room for denial. She had not sought to humiliate him. She had not attacked him. She had simply reminded him of the humanity he had pushed aside in his relentless climb to power, and that truth lingered in the air like a mirror he could not turn away from. The investors began speaking quietly among themselves. The older gentleman, whose calm wisdom seemed to radiate effortlessly, finally addressed Ethan directly. "Mr. Cole," he said in a measured tone, "I hope you understand the gravity of what just happened." Ethan bristled, his pride wounded, but he forced himself to nod. The older man continued, "You tried to test someone's worth in a language you did not expect her to know. But in doing so, she revealed a deeper understanding that many leaders have forgotten." His gaze was not harsh, but it held a clarity that made Ethan feel exposed. Respect is the foundation of every great partnership, and today she demonstrated it more gracefully than you did. Ethan forced a tight smile. "Yes, well, I suppose she's more skilled than I expected." His voice sounded strained, lacking the confidence he usually carried like armor. The older investor tilted his head slightly. "Skill is valuable, but character is priceless. And your waitress has demonstrated both." Those words stung more than the challenge itself, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Ethan felt heat rise in his throat, the kind that signaled he was not just embarrassed, but confronted with who he had become. For years, he had justified his harshness as necessary for success. He told himself that pressure built results, that fear earned compliance, that power demanded distance. But tonight, he had witnessed something different: authority without cruelty, strength without arrogance, confidence without belittling. And it came not from a CEO, not from an executive, not from a billionaire, but from a waitress whose sense of dignity was worth more than all the wealth he possessed. Meanwhile, Layla moved gracefully behind the bar, preparing their drinks with practiced precision. Her hands moved fluidly, gently mixing, pouring, placing garnishes with careful intention. She wasn't thinking about Ethan's embarrassment or the attention she had drawn. She was thinking about her mother again, about the nights they sat together on their small apartment floor, reading stories in Arabic, laughing softly, promising each other that kindness was not weakness, humility was not defeat, and dignity was not something anyone could take from you unless you surrendered it willingly. Layla never surrendered, not tonight, not ever. As she returned to the table, she placed each drink down with the calm elegance that defined her. The investors thanked her warmly in English and Arabic, their smiles genuine and appreciative. They even complimented her pronunciation, which she accepted with a modest nod. Then she turned to Ethan, who met her with a conflicted expression, half prideful resistance, half mumbled remorse. For a brief second, something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that the evening had shifted something in him. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" she asked softly. Her voice was as gentle as ever, no sarcasm, no bitterness, no triumphant edge that would make him feel worse. She held herself above the temptation to retaliate. That only deepened the impact of her dignity. Ethan swallowed. "No," he said, his tone quieter than usual, almost uncomfortable. "Thank you." It was such a simple phrase, but coming from him, it felt like a confession, an admission that she deserved better than how he had treated her. Layla nodded politely and stepped away. The investors watched her leave before turning to Ethan again. One of them,
a sharp-minded businessman from Switzerland, leaned in. "Your company prides itself on global communication, yes." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you should remember that communication begins with respect. Without it, technology is meaningless." It was a blow delivered with calm precision, and Ethan felt it acutely. The rest of dinner proceeded with a quietness Ethan wasn't accustomed to. He found himself distracted, glancing at Layla from time to time, observing the way she interacted with customers, the way she smiled warmly, even after everything, the way she created comfort around her effortlessly. He had built a multi-billion-dollar company, but he couldn't create the environment of warmth and trust that she did naturally, without trying. His mind drifted to his own employees, how they avoided eye contact, how they rushed to do tasks without asking questions, how they never smiled unless a client was watching. He had created a workplace where fear was fuel. And now, watching Layla, he realized fear never nurtured growth. It only built walls. When the plates were cleared and the dinner neared the end, the older investor leaned back in his chair. "Ethan," he said quietly, "she offered you a different proposal earlier, one you didn't care to hear." Ethan looked up, surprised. He had nearly forgotten. Layla had said she had a better offer for him, one she believed he needed more than money. Ethan felt a strange pull inside him, a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He wasn't used to taking advice from anyone outside his executive circle, let alone a waitress he had mocked. But something about her presence, her strength, made him want to hear what she had to say. The meal concluded, and as the investors rose to leave, the older gentleman approached Layla at the counter. He bowed his head respectfully, a gesture that touched her deeply. "Thank you," he told her softly in Arabic. "You reminded us all something important tonight." She smiled warmly, grateful for his kindness. When Ethan approached the counter a moment later, the room seemed to hold its breath again. Layla met his gaze without hostility. "You mentioned earlier," he said awkwardly, "that you had a different proposal for me." Layla nodded gently. "I do." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "What is it?" She folded her hands, not as a subordinate, but as someone offering a sincere truth. "It's a challenge, but not the kind you gave me." His brows twitched in curiosity. She continued, "I challenge you to treat the people who work for you, the ones who clean your offices, schedule your meetings, serve your food, and build your products, with the same respect you expect from the world." Her words weren't sharp, they weren't bitter, they were compassionate, almost hopeful. "Because leadership isn't about being served," she said quietly. "It's about how you serve others." Ethan stood stunned, unable to speak. "And if you do," she added gently, "you may find your company grows, not just in profit, but in loyalty, passion, and trust, things money cannot buy."
The shift in the shadows of success. For days after the dinner at the Grand Meridian, Ethan Cole found himself unable to shake the memory of Layla's calm voice, the eloquence of her words, and the quiet strength she carried in her posture. The conversation replayed in his head at moments he least expected, during morning briefings, while reviewing quarterly numbers, even as he scrolled through endless emails filled with demands, expectations, and reminders of the empire he had built brick by brick. But what unsettled him most was not the humiliation of being challenged publicly, nor the embarrassment of losing control in front of potential investors. It was the realization that a waitress had shown him a version of leadership he had never embodied, despite all his wealth and influence. In the following week, employees at Cole Systems noticed something strange, something that rippled quietly through the corporate building like an unfamiliar breeze. The CEO arrived earlier than usual, but instead of the usual clipped stride and sharp orders, he walked through the halls with a thoughtful heaviness. He paused at doors he normally passed without a glance. He nodded at people he usually overlooked. He even held the elevator for a young intern who nearly tripped trying to reach it, offering a brief but genuine, "Take your time, no rush." The employees exchanged bewildered glances. Ethan Cole was not known for patience. He was not known for softness. He was known for results and ruthless ambition. And while that had propelled the company into astronomical success, it had also carved fear into the culture like an unwritten rule. But now, something had shifted. Ethan reviewed his calendar, noticing meetings he had previously pushed down the priority list, department wellness reviews, new employee suggestions, workplace environment surveys. For years, he had seen them as unnecessary noise that distracted from innovation and high-level strategy. Now he felt compelled to read every comment, every anonymous complaint, every plea from employees who felt invisible in a company built on excellence but starved of empathy. The words hit harder than financial losses ever had. "We feel pressured, not appreciated. Management is distant and unapproachable. We are afraid to make mistakes. Leadership listens only when profits are involved." Ethan found himself leaning back in his chair, the weight of those sentences pressing heavily on his chest. He rubbed his forehead, realizing how blind he had been, not because he intentionally ignored his employees, but because he had never been taught to lead with heart. He had grown up believing success demanded hardness. But Layla's voice whispered in his mind, "Leadership isn't about being served, it's about how you serve others." Meanwhile, at the Grand Meridian, Layla returned to her routine with the same grace she always carried. She had not thought much about the encounter after that evening. She had witnessed arrogance before and had learned how to handle it without allowing it to stain her spirit. But the sincerity in Ethan's eyes when she gave her final proposal stayed with her. She hoped, quietly and without expectation, that he would reflect on her words, yet she expected nothing in return. True kindness, she believed, was given without demand. A week later, Layla was surprised to see a familiar figure standing in the lobby of the restaurant, not dressed in his usual designer suit, but in a simple shirt and blazer, his posture less rigid and his expression surprisingly humble. When their eyes met, Ethan offered an awkward but sincere nod. "Layla," he greeted. She blinked, caught off guard but not unsettled. "Mr. Cole," she replied politely. He stepped closer, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "Do you have a moment?" She glanced toward her manager, who gave her a subtle nod of approval. Layla gestured to the side, near the entrance where the evening light cast soft golden patterns across the marble floor. Ethan took a slow breath before speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not rushing, not masking vulnerability with pride. Not just for the challenge I gave you, but for the way I spoke to you. I acted—" He hesitated, searching for a word he seldom used. "I acted shamefully." Layla studied him for a moment, sensing the sincerity beneath the discomfort. She nodded gently, encouraging him to continue. "I realized something," he said, exhaling deeply. "I've built my entire career believing people respected me because of my position. But after that night, I understood they feared me, not respected me. And fear doesn't build anything meaningful." Layla felt warmth rise in her chest. Not pride, not satisfaction, but gratitude that her words had found a place to grow. "It takes courage to admit that," she said softly. "Most people never do." Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "Courage. I suppose that's what I've been lacking." He paused, his gaze shifting as he tried to form a sentence he had never imagined saying. "What you said about leadership, I've been thinking about it. More than I expected, more than I wanted to, honestly." Layla smiled faintly. "Growth begins where comfort ends." Ethan let her words sink in. He nodded. "I want to change things. In my company, in the way I treat people." He swallowed. "But I don't know where to start." Layla considered this, choosing her words carefully. She said, "Start with listening. Not from the top of the staircase where CEOs stand, but from the floor where people live their daily efforts. Ask your employees what they need. Ask what they fear. Ask what inspires them. And then show them you care by acting on it."
Ethan listened as though each word was a map to a place he had overlooked for years. "I want to do that," he said quietly, "but it feels overwhelming." Layla shook her head. "You don't need to change everything at once. You only need to take one step, and then another." Her voice softened. "Just don't stop walking." Ethan met her eyes, humbled. "You know, Layla, I could have responded to your arrogance with anger. You could have humiliated me the same way I tried to humiliate you." Layla lowered her gaze thoughtfully. When she looked back up, her eyes held kindness. "Arrogance is a wound," she replied softly. "I don't heal wounds by wounding others." Ethan felt his throat tighten. Her words were so simple, yet so profound, and so far from the environment in which he had spent his entire professional life. He cleared his throat. "Can I ask something?" She nodded. "Would you be willing to help me? Not as an employee or a consultant, but simply as someone who understands what I clearly don't?" Layla tilted her head. "Help you how?" Ethan exhaled. "Help me change the culture of my company. Help me understand how to treat people better." For a moment, she hesitated, not from fear, but from humility. "I am just a waitress," she said softly. Ethan shook his head with an unexpected conviction. "No," he replied. "You are someone who sees people, someone who understands respect, communication, dignity. Those are qualities worth more than any business degree." Layla absorbed his words quietly, feeling both surprised and honored. But she also knew that change did not happen because someone asked for guidance. Change happened because someone carried the will to follow through. After a moment, she answered gently, "I can offer insight. I can share what I know. But the work, the real change, must come from you." Ethan nodded, accepting the responsibility. "Then I'll do the work." They exchanged a quiet moment of understanding, a moment that felt strangely transformative. Before Ethan left, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. He offered it to her. Layla frowned slightly. "I told you I don't want your money," she reminded him gently. Ethan shook his head. "It's not money." Hesitation flickered in her eyes before she slowly took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a formal letter embossed with the Cole Systems logo. She read aloud, confused. "Corporate Scholarship Initiative?" Ethan nodded. "I started an internal program for employee development, education, training, language classes, personal growth, all funded by the company." Layla looked up. "That's wonderful. But why give this to me?" He smiled softly, not in arrogance, but in gratitude, "Because your words inspired it, and because I want to offer you the first sponsorship, full funding to pursue any program, any course, any degree you want." Layla inhaled sharply, overwhelmed. "Mr. Cole, He lifted a hand gently. "You gave me dignity when I didn't deserve it. This is not a gift. It is an acknowledgement." Emotions swelled in Layla's chest, gratitude, disbelief, and a quiet joy. She closed the envelope with care. "Thank you," she whispered, 2 words laden with sincerity. Ethan offered a small nod before stepping away, turning back only once to say, "This is only the beginning." As he walked out of the Grand Meridian, Layla stood watching him, realizing that sometimes the people who seem hardest to change are the ones who simply needed to be seen, understood, and challenged with compassion. And in that moment, she understood something else. She had given him far more than a lesson. She had given him a chance.
The million-dollar lesson money could never buy. Months passed, and the transformation that began in a quiet corner of the Grand Meridian had steadily unfurled into something far greater than anyone could have predicted. For years, Ethan Cole's company had been known for its innovation, but now it was gaining a reputation for something far rarer: genuine humanity. The corporate building, once a place filled with silent hallways and rushed footsteps, had slowly evolved into an environment where conversations blossomed, ideas were shared freely, and employees carried themselves with a sense of belonging that had been missing for far too long. In the past, executives avoided floor-level departments unless absolutely necessary.
Now it wasn't uncommon to see Ethan stepping into the design studio to ask questions, or walking into customer service to inquire about their challenges. He met with interns, listened to their perspectives, and even visited night shift teams with warm acknowledgement rather than cold inspection. His leadership team was stunned by the shift, some skeptical at first, but eventually convinced as they saw the tangible changes in morale, productivity, and innovation. The workplace began thriving, not because of new technology or stricter policies, but because Ethan had started something revolutionary for him: listening. Genuine listening. It was Layla's simple yet profound advice, "Start with listening," that had become the foundation of a cultural transformation. Employees who once felt invisible now felt valued, and those who had planned to leave reconsidered their decisions. Creative ideas poured in more freely than ever before. Innovation flourished not in fear, but in safety. Ethan found himself fascinated by the process, humbled by the realization that compassion inspired more brilliance than intimidation ever could. During this time, Layla pursued the scholarship Ethan had offered, not for prestige or recognition, but because she had dreams that had waited patiently in the background while she worked long hours to support herself and her siblings. She enrolled in a leadership and communication program, combining her natural empathy with structured knowledge. Her days were long, studying by night and working at the restaurant by day, but she thrived. Professors were drawn to her insightful comments, and classmates admired her ability to bridge understanding between people with very different worldviews. She became known as someone who elevated conversations, never dominating, but always deepening. Her presence brought clarity, compassion, and perspective. Yet she remained the same humble person she had always been. She continued working at the Grand Meridian, not because she needed to financially, but because she loved the human connections the place offered. Mrs. Chen still arrived every Thursday to talk about her grandchildren, and Mr. Rodriguez still shared memories of his late wife. Layla cherished these interactions. They grounded her. They reminded her that life was not measured by titles or wealth, but by the quality of the moments we give to each other. One evening, a special event was scheduled at the Grand Meridian, an annual charity gala hosted by none other than Cole Systems. It was traditionally an event of extravagance, attended by people dressed in glamour discussing philanthropy over expensive wine. But this year, the theme was different. Ethan had insisted the gala focus on community, on opportunity, on celebrating the everyday people whose contributions quietly shaped the world. The transformation within him was unmistakable. He didn't want a night of showcasing wealth, he wanted a night of acknowledging humanity. Layla was busy preparing the upstairs dining area with her team when she noticed a familiar figure entering the restaurant with a calm confidence she had not seen before. Ethan approached with a warm smile, dressed impeccably but carrying none of his former arrogance. "Layla," he greeted, his tone gentle. She smiled genuinely in return. "Good evening, Mr. Cole. I see the gala is in full swing." He nodded. "It is, and I'm glad you're here." She tilted her head in curiosity. "Why is that?" Ethan took a breath, choosing his words with care. "Because something is happening tonight that concerns you." She raised an eyebrow, confused but patient. Ethan continued. "In these past months, I have looked at leadership in ways I never considered before. I've read about emotional intelligence, communication, ethical leadership, concepts I used to ignore. But what struck me most is how many successful companies highlight stories of individuals who changed them from the inside out." He paused, meeting his gaze with sincerity. "And I realized our company has such a story too." Layla's brows knitted slightly, unsure where he was going. Ethan gestured toward the large doors leading to the main ballroom. "Come with me," he said softly. "There's something I want you to see." Layla followed him, her heart pounding slightly with curiosity. As they approached the ballroom, the sound of music, soft laughter, and clinking glasses filled the air. The room was beautifully decorated, but not with symbols of wealth, rather with photographs of employees, community events, team achievements, and moments of kindness captured throughout the year. Ethan led her to the stage where a microphone stood under warm lighting. The crowd quieted as he stepped forward. Layla stayed behind the curtain, watching quietly. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice steady and resonant. "Thank you all for coming tonight. This year has been a year of growth, not just for the company, but for me personally." The audience listened attentively. "Many of you know that Cole Systems has built its reputation on innovation, but innovation means nothing without people, and I realized that somewhere along the way I forgot that." He paused, letting the honesty settle. "But someone reminded me. Not a consultant, not a CFO, not a board member, a waitress." Whispered astonishment rippled through the room. Layla felt her breath catch. Ethan continued. "Months ago, during a dinner meeting, I behaved in a way I am not proud of. I challenged someone's worth in front of an entire restaurant, believing my status gave me the right." He shook his head slowly. "I was wrong, more wrong than I can express." He took a breath. This woman responded not with anger, not with arrogance, not with retaliation, but with dignity, wisdom, and grace. She taught me more in 10 minutes than I had learned in 10 years. Many guests leaned in, moved by the vulnerability in his voice. Ethan continued, "Her words changed me, her presence changed me, and because of her, this company has changed." He gestured toward the photographs surrounding the ballroom. All of this, the new scholarship programs, the leadership workshops, the wellness initiatives, started with her. Then he turned toward the curtain and said with quiet reverence, "Layla, would you come here for a moment?" The crowd turned as she stepped onto the stage, her heart racing, her eyes wide with disbelief. She stood beside Ethan, overwhelmed yet composed, her hands clasped softly in front of her. Ethan offered her a heartfelt smile. "Everyone," he said, "this is Layla Hassan, the person who reminded me what true leadership looks like." And applause rose, genuine, warm, and filled with admiration. Layla felt her eyes sting with emotion. Ethan continued, "Layla, tonight on behalf of Cole Systems, I want to honor you with the first Human Leadership Award, created in recognition of those who lead with empathy, courage, and integrity." He handed her a beautifully framed certificate engraved with her name and the words, "Leadership begins with humanity." Tears gathered in her eyes, not from pride, but from the overwhelming realization that her mother's teachings had reached so far beyond anything she ever imagined. The applause continued, echoing the impact of her presence in that room. As the noise softened and she stepped back from the microphone, Ethan leaned toward her and spoke quietly so only she could hear. "You once refused my $1,000,000 challenge," he said with a gentle smile. "But tonight, you taught me a lesson worth far more than money." Layla smiled back, her voice a whisper. "And you listened. That's all that ever mattered." The night continued in celebration, but for two people standing beneath the soft glow of the chandelier, it wasn't just a gala. It was the final chapter of a story that began with arrogance and transformed into understanding, respect, and change. A story that proved the most powerful lessons don't come from wealth, they come from humanity. And in that truth, both Layla and Ethan discovered something priceless. Strength is not measured by how loudly one stands above others, but how deeply one chooses to see them.